By now you're maybe wondering if this is a joke that I brought up the Wheel of Fortune in terms of how to get out of a rut, but I'm not joking at all. I'm totally serious. However, it's not exactly what you might be thinking. It's certainly not the game show. It has nothing to do with the game show, what I'm going to show you. However, before we jump right in, let me just mention that if you're in a rut, it can be a painful, depressing experience. And to get out of pain and depression is really a fundamental move we need to make. We need to get out of that in order to really start making progress, because that can be like a quicksand. If you've been in any kind of pain and depression, I don't have to explain what that means. So we need to get out of that pain. We need to get out of that depression if we're in a rut. And so now it's very interesting. One thing that's very interesting is that soldiers, wounded soldiers in battle, seem to experience little pain while they continue fighting in the midst of the battle. And that's really a key thing to consider in our own lives, because maybe, I don't know, why is it adrenaline, excitement, distraction, whatever it is that causes them to fight through their pain. And literally their pain is they seem to experience very little pain in the height of the battle. So how does that apply to us? Well, let's take a look at Euclid in the 3rd century. Now, Euclid, you might say he's not a very active person, but this is illustrative, because Euclid was actually highly active on the mental level. He was a thinker. He was a mathematician. And Euclid is famous for writing one of the great books on mathematics in history. It's called Elements in the 3rd century. And this was a monumental work of art because it classified and organized all the mathematical concepts up to that time. Euclid came up with nothing new on his own, but he did organize it in a brilliant way that was inspiring to mathematicians. And so he did have that impact, and he was certainly very busy while he did it. But ultimately, many of his concepts at that time, other than the inspiration and that they brought for other mathematicians, they weren't life-changing. He didn't bring anything new that was really life-changing or change the world at that time. However, in the 17th century, you take a look at his work at conic projections, which had been totally irrelevant in the 3rd century. Yet in the 17th century, this same concept became revolutionary for astronomy and warfare. So the same concept, but now it's suddenly, over here it's totally, nobody cares. Over here, suddenly this is revolutionary and changes the world. So that's the Wheel of Fortune I'm talking about. What changed here? The concept didn't change. Conic projections are conic projections. What changed is circumstances. So that's the Wheel of Fortune, the wheel of circumstances that turn as days turn, as life changes. And so that's why we can never get depressed. We can never stay depressed and gloomy and in a rut, because look, tomorrow anything can change. Anything can change. And so that's why one of the keys to getting out of a rut through the Wheel of Fortune is massive action. And massive action is essential, because that's how you work the wheel. For example, just you look at Newton's second law, which says the acceleration of an object depends on the mass of an object and the amount of force applied. Okay? The acceleration of an object depends on the mass of the object and the amount of force applied. The amount of force applied. So that's actually the key. The key to acceleration and to getting that wheel turning, and to getting, well, the wheel's going to turn anyway, but to work it to our favor, is to get ourselves accelerating and creating action, creating cause and effect in the world, positive cause and effect in the world, you have writers who will write many books and that have no popularity, and then suddenly one takes off. And as was the case for many writers. And so this, and same, you can look at salesmen. They hit many doors and they don't get a sale, but then finally, because they're persistent and doggedly tenacious, finally, one of those doors opens and they get a sale. And so it's called massive action. That's how we work it's only through massive action that the wheel of fortune, which is basically life, changing circumstances, history, the changing currents of society, the rise and fall of nations, the rise and fall of industries. All of this stuff will eventually turn in our favor if we have been if we've been very active and stayed busy, and we've varied our approach. And so, a perfect example of another way. For example, how do we vary our approach? And let's say we're in a state of, there's serious things. Some people are facing serious things. For example, conscience, regret, gloom, depression even. How do you deal with that? How do you get out of that? Well, frankly, if you have a goal and you work toward it with vigor, just that alone will distract you. And just like the soldier who experiences little pain in battle, that will keep your mind focused on something positive as opposed to self-introspection, which is almost a prescription for depression. So what we do instead is we get busy. Now, however, sometimes it's deeper than that. And sometimes we have to really deal with the issue at hand. Now, a perfect example of this was Anton Chekhov's novel, The Country Doctor. Now, this is the story of Dr. Banassus. Well, actually, it really is about this soldier, Pierre Genestus. And Pierre goes to visit this doctor. And the reason why is this doctor is known as like a saint in this small town. And so he wants to know the secret. How is it what inspires this doctor? What has caused him to be this great man and this saint? And so he goes to this small town and he seeks out the doctor and he goes around with him and he's amazed. Everybody just honors this doctor and reveres him, and they all see him as a saint and a great man. And he goes around doing all these good works, totally selfless. He doesn't even think about his own self-interest. It's totally about just helping the people, using his gifts and talents. He's a very talented and smart person, and he knows how to use these skills for the benefit of the town. And finally, the doctor's kind of mysterious and elusive about what motivates him. But finally, he admits, Banassus admits what's going on. He admits he actually has a terribly troubled past, and he tells a story about how when he was young, he got a girl pregnant and then he abandoned her. He abandoned her and then she died. And so he decided at least by now, came to his senses and decided to raise the son, but then the son died. And so he was devastated by, the consequences of his actions and what had happened. And so, but he had to live on. And he fell in love again, and he was going great. But his conscience, he had this conscience that was taunting him. It was like a dark shadow, and he tried to suppress it, but it didn't work. And so finally, he just had to come clean and tell his new fiancée, what he had done in his past. And unfortunately, it was so shocking, and it shook her trust in him about what kind of a person he was, and she dumped him. And so after this is because of his experiences and his, he was going from a state of really selfishness, maybe narcissism. Well, he left all that behind, and he decided to give up his life for others, to give up his life for the people. And that's how he ended up in the small town. But how did he get out of that rut ultimately? Through action focused on helping other people. And that made all the difference. So the wheel of fortune works in many different ways. The way we get busy and the way we get it working in our favor is we have to get into action.